So tell us a bit about this study. Who are these oil and gas workers, and what sort of conditions did you find that they were working in?
Yeah, so this study was essentially a follow-up to a lot of work we've done talking to members of the community about the transition to clean energy, but we noticed like a big missing link to that research is specifically talking to oil and gas workers. So this study laserly focused not only on oil and gas workers, but Latino oil and gas workers in the Permian Basin, which is obviously the hotbed for oil country in the state of New Mexico. And essentially, we want to know a few things. One is, what are the working conditions within the oil and gas industry, specifically for this segment of the workforce? And also thinking bigger picture, as we're going to transition away from fossil fuels, some of the questions we wanted to find out are these workers interested in transitioning to clean energy jobs or other industries? What would that look like in terms of their workforce development training needs? And, if we want to put those workforce development training needs in play, should that be in English? Should that be in Spanish? Can it be done virtually? A lot of really in-depth insights to try to inform workforce solutions on some of the plans moving forward.
Got it. And you said this study focused on the Latino workforce. Why was that?
That's right, yeah. And this is actually one of the things that got me really interested in taking on this project. I was not aware that the workforce is heavily Latino. Roughly 40% of all oil and gas workers in the state of New Mexico are Latino, a lot of them immigrant. I think a lot of us, we hear oil and gas workers, assumption I often made is these folks must be from Texas. I didn't realize a lot of these folks are Latino and they're from here, from the state of New Mexico, and want to stay here.
And what kind of conditions did you hear they were reporting from the field?
Probably the most important for us to think about, not only for addressing these issues now, but also making sure as we transition to clean energy infrastructure, we don't carry a lot of this with us, is the dangerous nature of the jobs. We asked in qualitative interviews and in surveys from the oil and gas workforce directly, have you yourself witnessed an accident? Have you been, unfortunately, somebody who's been harmed by an accident? Overwhelmingly, 80% of the people we spoke with said they themselves have witnessed an accident on the job. 20% have had a serious accident themselves on the job. And probably the biggest take-home message is, when we asked folks at the end of the day what happened, unfortunately we learned there's a lot of casualties and very serious injuries on the job. But the take-home message was, overwhelmingly workers said these can be prevented. We could do less of this if we did better training and put better overall safety standards into the workforce. So I think that's one of the big take-home messages. Obviously, we want to address this now, but let's not repeat the same dynamic as we transition to other industries that are going to replace fossil fuels.
I see. That's a really great point. The oil and gas industry has a reputation for creating high-paying jobs, but what did your research find?
Yeah, and a lot of what we try to do in this style of research is address sometimes myths, sometimes there's a lot of fact-based in what we hear about this workforce. But like a lot of New Mexicans, I always perceived most of this workforce makes six figures. And there's some truth to that. A lot of the members of the workforce we talk to get paid very, very well. But two insights from this is most folks that are generating high salaries work a lot of overtime. In fact, I think the average number of work hours per day was 12 hours. And the folks that we talked with that specifically work in the oil and gas industry. So a lot of them do make a lot of high-paying jobs, but it comes with trade-offs, and a lot of that is very, very long work days, which if you think about it in terms of what we just talked about, potential injuries, right, that's probably not the greatest recipe for success in preventing, on-the-job injuries and accidents of that nature. We also learned that a large segment, I think 20% of the folks we talked to make $20,000 or less. And a lot of those folks, right, are maybe in spillover industries that support the oil and gas infrastructure, but aren't directly, in the oil and gas industry themselves. So we wanted to take a pretty comprehensive look at this and figure out not just the folks that are making really good incomes, but what about everybody else? Do they still have to work overtime just to barely get by? And I think that was something that I myself learned in addition to folks that took a look at the report.
Got it, that they're really making some of these compromises, like working long hours, increasing risk of injury, taking time away from family, taking time away from opportunity to train for other jobs even, perhaps.
That's right. And unfortunately, a large segment don't have a lot of the typical benefit infrastructure many of us take for granted. So a lot of it is the trade-offs. You might have a pretty good income, but you don't have a lot of the other safety protocols in place. And a lot of that are things like unemployment insurance. Yeah. We know this industry in particular, we've all witnessed it, goes up and down, right? And so in some of those down periods, if the workforce doesn't have unemployment insurance, or at least unemployment insurance that gets them close to what they make in terms of income, right? That's a loophole that I think partly this study can help inform trying to address with policy down the line.
Got it. So what policy decisions could be made in the short term to address some of the poor working conditions and poor pay for this workforce?
I'll say that a big chunk of this research, with our partnership with Somos Un Pueblo Unido, who commissioned the study, they're very, very effective at educating the state legislature, identifying what needs to be put in place. And they were successful in this legislative session with a couple of victories that I think are at least partly attributable to what we found in this study. One of them is I know that there's $5 million invested in adult workforce development training, and specifically for hard to reach workers like who we're talking about now in the Permian Basin, heavily Spanish speakers, et cetera. And one of the main findings we found in our study is a lot of the resources that are available for retraining from the federal government are not available to a large segment of the immigrant workforce, which unfortunately in our state, right, comprises a large segment of folks. This $5 million from the state specifically is flexible to be able to reach mixed status families. And I think that directly addresses one aspect of our report that said we need to find ways to fill some gaps in federal funding. And I think this does just that. So I think that's a pretty important win. And then we also learned in the study that a large segment of the workforce positively very interested in getting retraining. But they noted to us, look, I work a lot of hours. If I'm going to do any kind of workforce training, that's taking time away. I need to be able to be paid for that or have some type of subsidy or some benefit financially to take off time from work. I know there's a pilot program that was funded in this state legislative session. I think it puts $1 million in play for low-income workers that are currently going through any type of workforce development training, and it pays them a monthly stipend to offset some of the missed hours from work. So I think it's very straightforward, smart policy that, again, at least is somewhat attributable. As researchers, we'd always like to say research helped shed light on this and led to some of these outcomes. I can say in this context, at least a little bit of this is due to the research.
So really impact and results from some of your work.
That's what we all hope for. I have to say I've been doing this, almost 20 years. It doesn't always happen this way, but I think in this state where you've got policymakers, the legislature, Department of Workforce Solutions, that cabinet secretary has been a major partner for us. They're hungry for data-driven solutions. They want to know the answers to these questions because they're very aggressively looking at how to tackle some of these problems while there's time to do it, right? We have some runway to work with before the full transition, and I think it's a benefit that folks are looking to the university to try to answer some of these questions.
That's great. And your study looked specifically at women working in oil and gas and working in industries that are sort of associated and benefit off the side of oil and gas. What did you find when you looked at their options and their limitations?
Yeah, I think, we often think, transition to clean energy, our team at UNM, we're a just transition to clean energy. Overall research team really thinking about this comprehensively. We often think oil and gas workers are going to be displaced, but what about all the spillover economies, right? We think about the Permian Basin, San Juan, these areas, right? They have a lot of infrastructure, restaurants, all those other businesses that feed off the workforce that's there to work in fossil fuels. So we wanted to find out what are some of the women in these areas, what are they thinking about being able to be retrained? What are their thoughts about what the future looks like? And very similar to the oil and gas workers themselves, very interested in getting trained to do other jobs. They recognize the future is coming and they want to be part of that future. But maybe one of the biggest take-home messages is, in order to make that a reality, a large segment of these women are going to need childcare, either provided directly, right, by however they're going to get trained, or indirectly being able to look for affordable but high-quality early childhood. That's an area we've been doing a lot of work in this space for some time. That's not a new finding, but I think what was new in this study is we specifically talked to a lot of the infrastructure in southeastern New Mexico, right? Folks that actually provide this level of service, right? Being able to provide training, whether it's in English language classes, GED, et cetera. And those folks told us directly, they recognize they need more funding to meet the current demand as well as it's going to grow over time as more of these folks look to find employment in other industries. So upside is a lot of desire from the workforce and the women as well that are their spouses or part of the workforce themselves to get retrained, but we're going to have to meet them halfway at least to be able to provide them with a little bit of subsidy to get trained as well as childcare. I think that's a big one that, again, I think the state legislature has continuously made investments into this space and are trying to figure out paths to be able to provide more providers, right, which is critical because we found, unfortunately, there's just not enough quality childcare to go around now, particularly in southeastern New Mexico. So we need to put infrastructure in place to meet the growing demand.
Got it, got it. And these are people who like recently arrived in the area. The population there is growing. They seem to want to settle down and establish southern New Mexico, southeastern New Mexico as home. But what do you hear about whether they want their children to work in this industry and what options are available to them or what alternatives are available?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of really important insights from the work that you noted on is a large segment, like overwhelmingly, I think we only talked to one person across all the surveys and focus groups who said they weren't interested in staying in the Permian Basin long term. So these folks have raised families here. You know, they want to see their kids grow up in the same region that they've spent a considerable amount of time in. But when we asked them, you know, what do those job prospects look like for your children? A lot of them said, look, we know that the oil and gas industry pays a good living, but we would love our kids to have opportunities that are not as dangerous and don't have the boom and bust rhythm to it that we all know the oil and gas industry does. So they're looking to us to figure out what are the job infrastructure, you know, plans looking like in the state, where there'll be good paying jobs that will be here in southeastern New Mexico so that our kids don't have to leave the region. And in fact, part of this study actually surveyed a lot of young adults, specifically in these counties, that are, you know, 18 to 25 years old, and we asked them, what do your prospects look like? Overwhelmingly, they want to stay in the region, but they realize, right, jobs are limited, and they're going to have to get trained in some of the jobs of the future to be able to stay in the same places that they grew up and they want to raise their kids in.
And I know that there's an ambition to see clean energy jobs become some of those like careers that people transition into, but is there a geographic mismatch between where the fossil fuel jobs are now and where clean energy jobs will be in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we've done quite a bit of research in this space, looking at what's going on in other states, looking at surveys of oil and gas industry overall across the country, trying to answer some of these questions. In essence, right, if we're building out the infrastructure, how do we do it right to make sure that native New Mexicans have access to the jobs of the future? And a couple of things to note from the body of work that we've conducted. One is, unfortunately, when you look at the oil and gas workforce, it's not the most diverse. In fact, it's one of the least diverse of any labor sectors in the country. It tends to be older, a little bit more white than the average workforce, and not very female, you know, in terms of the overall workforce dynamics in terms of gender. So if we want the jobs of the future to look like New Mexico, we're going to have to put action steps in place to make sure it looks like the state, which obviously is much more diverse across all these dimensions than when we look at the national workforce for clean energy jobs. Upside is, you know, when we look at specifically to New Mexico, what does the clean energy infrastructure look like? Where will these jobs be placed? Most of it is going to be in rural areas of the state. When we ask, however, the voting population in surveys, what is your perception about how things are going to look? Their perception is all the jobs are going to be in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. So a lot of it, I think, is dispelling myths that there will be a lot of relatively high-paying jobs available to folks in rural areas of the state. But again, you're going to have to get advanced training to be able to make sure that you're essentially trained up for some of these jobs. Good news is we're not talking about PhDs in engineering or biochemistry. A lot of these jobs, in fact, pay better at the lower levels of educational attainment than similar jobs in other industries with that level of education. But you do need to have some basic credentials. You do need to have some basic training to be able to be, you know, available and eligible for some of these jobs of the future.
Got it. So opportunities to quickly transition if we can sort of smooth the path there a little
That's
bit.
right.
So big picture, why is it important to understand the workforce in this industry and the challenges that they face?
Yeah, I think, you know, we all know that the state's economy is largely driven by the oil and gas industry, right? That's just what it is. But I don't think a lot of us look deeper into figuring out, like, who are these workers? What's their future going to look like, right, as these jobs, and they're acutely aware of this, right? They would tell us directly, we know these jobs are going away, it's scary. We want to be at least a forward thinker in trying to make sure that our families are taken care of when all of this transition happens. But I think making sure that that workforce, if you think about that statement we all make, a just transition to clean energy, in essence what that means is we all know for a number of reasons we're moving in this direction, and those are good things for the state of New Mexico in terms of our environment, everything else that goes along with that, but we don't want to leave anybody out. in that transition and leave them behind. And I think the oil and gas workforce are probably front and center of who might be most disproportionately impacted in a bad way from a very positive transition. And so I think a lot of our team's research is really aimed at making sure that those workers' voices are included in the policy discussions that are moving forward, because they will tell us in their own words they don't feel that either the state policymakers or the oil and gas industry actively ask for their opinions. And hopefully these type of reports that directly get their opinions and their voices on these subjects, right, give them a little bit more confidence that they're not being left out of these discussions.
That's great. And yes, and hearing from them and then taking that right to the Roundhouse as you've done, that's great. But thank you so much for coming on and talking to us today about some of your research.
Greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the research, and hopefully, again, it informs some of the wider segment of the population about some of these nuances associated with the transition to clean energy.
Absolutely. Thank you.